Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight we leave London and the fog behind and sail south, across the Atlantic to Uruguay in the early 1930s, to an isolated estancia called La Ventana, the window. It is a house of verandas and horses, of deep courtyards and old family pride, where a frightened mistress hears footsteps outside her door at night. Glass breaks in empty rooms, and a wealthy landowner is no longer sure whether he is dealing with nerves, malice, or something that wants the whole house to believe it is haunted. As always, this tale is an homage to Agatha Christie and the great Golden Age crime writers, but every character, scene, and line you're about to hear is entirely our own invention. We borrow the world of ocean liners, remote estates, and complicated families, and then ask what happens when Hercule Poirot walks straight into the middle of it. These long, fully produced mysteries take a great deal of time and work to create, and they only exist because listeners support Nocturnal Tales on Patreon and through one-off tips on Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All the links are in the description. Now, settle in as the Rio Negro fades into darkness, the horses shift in their stalls, and Poirot steps over the threshold of La Ventana to decide whether the danger lies in the house or in the people who have taught it how to sound haunted. Chapter 1. The Letter with the Horse's Crest. It is one of the small absurdities of modern life that a man may cross an ocean in a ship the size of a district, dine as well as at the Savoy, sleep in a cabin with electric light, and still arrive at the far end of the world smelling faintly of coal, salt, and other people's cigars. We had not intended to go to South America at all. Poirot had announced, with that air of finality he reserves for matters of comfort, that London was becoming impossible, too damp, too noisy, too careless about curtains, and that we should take a restorative holiday somewhere civilized. By civilized, of course, he meant somewhere with good linen, polite service, and food that did not taste of regret. I suggested the Côte d'Azur. He reminded me, with a glance as reproachful as a bishop's, that the Côte d'Azur was full of English people who wished to be seen resting. I suggested Switzerland. He replied that Switzerland was full of Swiss people who took resting far too seriously. It was at this point, when I was considering whether the British Isles might be improved by my absence alone, that the letter arrived. It came on thick paper with a crest stamped in dark ink, a stylized horse's head over a shield. The handwriting was firm and old-fashioned. The English was excellent, which always makes me nervous. Captain Arthur Hastings, it began, as if I were a man who habitually received invitations to remote estates on foreign continents. It continued in a tone of polite urgency that felt, to my mind, like a hand placed lightly over the mouth. The writer was a Uruguayan gentleman named Don Emilio Rivas. He owned an estancia near the Rio Negro. La Ventana, it was called, the window. And he asked, with a courtesy that did not conceal a certain insistence, whether I would come at once with Monsieur Hercule Poirot. There was talk of an illness in the household, of nerves, of distress, and, most interestingly, of fear. Not open fear, not the vulgar, shouting kind. Rather, the fear that exists in well-bred places when something discreditable has brushed against the family name, and everyone is determined to pretend it has not happened. I confess, at the first reading I felt an agreeable thrill. It is a weakness of mine. When other men receive a letter with a crest and an air of secrecy, they think of appointments, investments, or society weddings. I think of poison. Poirot read it twice, holding it at a precise angle so that the afternoon light fell favorably upon the paper. His expression did not change. It merely became more exact. "You see, Hastings," he said at last, "it is always the same. A gentleman writes, he says nothing, and yet he says everything. What do you make of it?" "That he is frightened. Also, how do you say? He is proud." He wishes to be saved, but he wishes to be saved without admitting that he needs saving. That's rather English of him for a Uruguayan. Poirot's moustache gave a small, satisfied twitch. Do not be childish. The English do not own monopoly on pride. Pride is international. Only the fashions change. I must admit I had expected him to refuse. Poirot does not care to be summoned like a plumber, and he dislikes long journeys unless they end in excellent hotels. But he surprised me. We go, he said simply. You mean it? Assuredly. The letter is interesting. Also, I have never been to Uruguay. I am curious, and, he added, as though it were the clinching argument, the ship will have good food. And so, in the early months of 1932, when Europe still pretended that the previous war had been the last, and that the next would not be so impolite as to arrive, we boarded a liner and set our faces south. The voyage itself was a floating civilization. Deck games, orchestras, and dinners where men argued about markets as though money were a natural phenomenon like weather. Poirot observed everyone with the quiet attention of a man watching fish in an aquarium. I played shuffleboard with a retired colonel who believed all foreign countries began at Dover and ended in disaster. When at last we reached Montevideo, it was like arriving in a city that had dressed for Europe but kept its own posture. There were broad avenues, handsome buildings, cafes with marble-topped tables, and a light over the water that made everything look clean even when it was not. The port smelled of coffee and hides. Men moved with that ease one finds in places where the land is generous and the sun is not always a matter of negotiation. Don Emilio Rivas met us himself. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with the straight back and quiet eyes of someone who had spent his life among horses and people who say little. His suit was English cut, but his face was unmistakably South American, weathered, proud, and controlled. He greeted me with a warmth that felt genuine, and Poirot with the careful respect one gives a specialist whose tools are invisible. Monsieur Poirot, he said, pronouncing it with surprising accuracy. Captain Hastings, you honor my house. Poirot bowed, one hand at his chest. Your house honors itself, monsieur, by seeking the truth. Don Emilio's mouth tightened briefly. Whether at the word truth or at the ease with which Poirot spoke it, I could not tell. We spent one night in Montevideo. Poirot insisted upon it, and I admit I was grateful. The hotel was excellent. There was hot water without persuasion, and the sheets were crisp in a way that suggested moral effort. Poirot dined with approval and asked the waiter in French whether the chef was from Bordeaux or simply ambitious. The next morning we began the journey inland. I had imagined, like an idiot, that an estancia near the Rio Negro meant something close by. In South America, near is a word that requires translation. We traveled first by train through open country, fields that rolled away like a green sea, and then by motor car along roads that were sometimes roads, and sometimes simply a communal agreement to drive in that direction. The sky felt larger than it does in England. The air smelled of grass and distant water. Here and there cattle moved like dark punctuation marks. Gauchos rode in the distance, their silhouettes so clean against the horizon that they looked almost theatrical. Poirot, who can find fault with anything, was silent for a long time. At last he said softly, "It is spacious." "Yes," I replied. "It makes one feel small." Poirot glanced at me. "It makes you feel small, Hastings, because you insist on measuring yourself against landscapes. One must measure oneself against the mind." I refrained from pointing out that my mind had yet to become an object visible from the train window. La Ventana appeared toward evening. Chapter 2. La Ventana. It was not a manor house in the English sense. It was something at once simpler and more commanding. a wide, low-built house of pale stone and whitewashed walls, with deep verandas and a central courtyard where a fountain played. Beyond it stretched stables, paddocks, and the long, disciplined lines of fences that spoke of work and ownership. There were trees, tall, old ones, planted with the patience of men who expect their grandchildren to enjoy the shade. There were flowers in pots and clipped hedges, but not the obsessive gardening of England. Everything here seemed practical first, and handsome as a byproduct. Don Emilio's household received us with a formality that was not stiff but deliberate, as though every gesture had been rehearsed in order to prevent someone from doing something foolish and revealing. We were shown to rooms that opened onto the veranda. From my window I could see the courtyard, and beyond it, a stretch of grass fading into dusk. Somewhere nearby, a horse stamped and snorted, and I found the sound strangely comforting. Horses, at least, are honest about their nerves. Dinner was served late, as is the custom in many places, and in the meantime Don Emilio introduced us, carefully, like a man handling glass, to the principal members of his household. First came his niece, Señora Isabel Rivas. She was perhaps 27 or 28, slim, dark-haired, and handsome rather than pretty. Her eyes were steady, and her manner had the composed kindness of a woman who has been obliged to become capable. She greeted me in English with the faintest Spanish accent, and Poirot in French with a fluency that made him blink. "You have travelled far for us," she said. "We are grateful." "Gratitude is good," Poirot replied, "but it is not necessary. I am not a priest. I am only a man who looks." A small flicker crossed her face. Interest, perhaps, or wariness. Next, Don Emilio presented his daughter, Camila. Camila was 21, and if Isabel was carved from calm stone, Camila was made of nerves and light. She had fairer skin, a softness around the mouth that suggested recent tears, and a way of holding herself as though she expected someone to correct her posture. When she spoke, her voice was polite, but there was something strained beneath it, like a violin string wound too tight. She looked at Poirot as one might look at a doctor one has been told to trust. "Monsieur," she said, "Papa says you can help." Poirot inclined his head. "I can attempt, mademoiselle. That is all any honest man can promise." Then came Don Emilio's sister, Doña Mercedes. Doña Mercedes was the sort of woman who could have been terrifying in any country. She was well into her 60s, dressed in black with a lace collar that made her look like a formal portrait, and she carried her authority like a fan, opened and displayed at will. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth thin, and her greeting had the precise warmth of a letter of condolence. "So," she said, in Spanish-accented English, "this is the famous detective." Poirot bowed. "And you, madame, are the famous aunt." I nearly laughed aloud. Doña Mercedes did not. Her eyes narrowed. "You are impertinent?" "No," Poirot corrected gently. "I am accurate. It is different." If she disliked him, she at least respected the boldness. It is an odd thing about formidable women. They can forgive nearly anything except weakness. We were also introduced to the household doctor, Dr. Esteban Alvarez, a compact man with intelligent eyes and hands that moved too quickly when he spoke, as though he were forever arranging invisible instruments. He greeted Poirot with professional skepticism. "I understand you are, how do you say, an investigator?" "I am," Poirot replied. Dr. Alvarez smiled thinly. "Then perhaps you will investigate what the body does when it is anxious. That is my field." Poirot's eyes remained polite and unreadable. "And perhaps, doctor," he said, "we will discover that anxiety is sometimes caused by something more solid than the imagination." There was also the major domo, a man named Reyes, who had served Don Emilio since youth. Reyes had a lined face, a quiet voice, and the habit of appearing without sound. When he spoke, it was always to supply exactly what was needed: a name, a direction, a glass of water. I noticed, as Poirot did, that Reyes watched everything while seeming to watch nothing. Finally, there was the foreman of the estancia, Martin Sosa, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with the blunt hands of a worker and the wary eyes of someone who has learned that the rich can be generous and dangerous in the same breath. Sosa greeted us respectfully, but his gaze lingered on Poirot with a faint hostility, as though he disliked strangers who asked questions. All this took place with the sun lowering beyond the veranda and the courtyard filling with shadow. Lamps were lit. The scent of grilled meat drifted from the kitchen. The place, for all its calm and beauty, felt tight, like a room in which everyone has agreed not to mention the broken glass on the floor. At last we sat down to dinner. It was excellent, I must say. There was soup, rich and clear. There was meat cooked in the South American manner, which is to say with confidence. There was wine that made me understand why men risk their souls for certain pleasures. Poirot ate with approval, but not with distraction. He listened more than he spoke. The conversation was carefully ordinary: the cattle, the weather, the city, the ship. When someone came near the subject of why we were there, it was as though an invisible hand turned the steering wheel away at the last moment. It was only after the meal, when coffee had been served and we sat on the veranda with the night coming in over the fields, that Don Emilio spoke plainly. He did not say much. He merely said enough to ensure that we understood there was a problem and that the problem had teeth. "In the last month," he began, "there have been incidents, small things, things one would call nonsense if one were not living inside them." "Such as?" Poirot asked softly. Don Emilio stared out into the dark. A door found open that was locked. A bridle cut in the stable. A glass moved from one place to another. A horse, my best horse, found sweating in the stall at dawn as if he had been ridden hard. Yet the gate was closed, and no one admits to taking him. "That could be a boy," I said. "Or a servant." Don Emilio's jaw tightened. "There are no boys here who would do it, and no servants who would dare. And yet it happened." Camilla's hands tightened around her cup. Isabel watched her, and then looked away quickly, as though she did not wish to be seen watching. "And," Don Emilio continued, "there is the matter of my wife." At this, the air changed. Doña Mercedes lifted her chin. Dr. Alvarez looked down at his hands. Reyes did not move at all. Poirot's voice remained mild. "Madame Rivas is ill?" Don Emilio's eyes flickered once toward the house, toward the dark windows. "She does not come to dinner any more," he said. "She does not receive anyone. She says she hears someone walking at night outside her door. She says she smells a bitterness, like something burned. She says—" His voice tightened and pride fought with fear. "She says someone wants to drive her mad." "That is a dramatic statement," Poirot said. Don Emilio gave a short, harsh laugh. "My wife is not dramatic." Dr. Alvarez spoke then, with the air of a man protecting his territory. "She is nervous. She has been under strain. We have had family troubles. She sleeps poorly. She imagines things." "And the cut bridle?" Poirot asked. "The sweating horse? The locked door open?" Dr. Alvarez spread his hands. "Pranks. Coincidences. People interpret." Poirot nodded slowly as though agreeing, but his eyes in the half-light of the veranda were very bright. "And you, monsieur," he said to Don Emilio, "you interpret—" "What?" Don Emilio hesitated. Then he said very quietly, "I interpret that someone inside my house is doing this, and I interpret that if it continues, something worse will happen." There was a moment of silence. From somewhere in the courtyard came the soft splash of the fountain. In the distance, a night bird called once, and then stopped, as if it too had been corrected. Poirot set down his coffee cup with exquisite care. "Good," he said simply. "Now we begin." At that exact moment, from inside the house there came a sound, faint but unmistakable. It was the sound of glass breaking. Camilla made a small, strangled noise. Doña Mercedes rose at once, rigid with anger rather than fear. Reyes moved like a shadow, already halfway to the door. Dr. Alvarez's face tightened, and Don Emilio's hand closed around the arm of his chair with the strength of a man restraining himself from running. Poirot did not move quickly. He only looked at each of them, one after the other, with the steady attention of a man taking a photograph in his mind. Then he stood. "Come," he said. "We will not be late to our first lesson." And we went into the house, following Reyes down a corridor that smelled faintly of polish and flowers, toward the place where the sound had come from, toward, it seemed to me, the heart of La Ventana, where all that polite silence had been stored like gunpowder. Chapter 3. The Broken Glass. Reyes led us along the corridor with the silent efficiency of a man who has spent his life preventing small incidents from becoming large ones. The house, now that we were inside it, felt cooler and more private than the veranda, thick walls, tiled floors, and that faint perfume of wax and flowers which old houses wear like good manners. We reached a small sitting room that opened onto the courtyard. A lamp burned on a side table. The furniture was arranged with the careful neutrality of a room meant for receiving, not living. On the floor near the hearth lay the broken glass. It was not a window pane, as I had expected, nor a lamp. It was a tumbler, plain, thick, practical, shattered into clean fragments that glittered like ice on stone. The shards lay in a half-fan, scattered outward from the fireplace, as though the glass had been flung hard and low. Doña Mercedes came in behind us and made a sound of disdain. "Ridiculous," she said. "A household disturbed by a water-glass." Don Emilio ignored her. His eyes were on Reyes. "Who was here?" "No one, senor," Reyes replied. "Not since we cleared after coffee." "The shutters?" "Latched, senor." Don Emilio looked at the windows. The shutters were indeed closed and secured. If the glass had been thrown, it had not come from outside. That left only one possibility. Someone inside the house had done it, or the house itself had decided, for the sake of drama, to break its own crockery. Poirot crouched near the hearth, careful not to shift a fragment. He examined the distribution as though reading a diagram. "It was not dropped," he said. Dr. Alvarez gave a tight smile. "And what else, Monsieur Poirot? It was not politely placed there either." Poirot held up a small shard between his fingers, lifted it toward the lamp, and then returned it with exactness. "When a glass falls, it breaks in a certain way. Here, see? The fragments fly outward. This was thrown, with intention." Camilla drew in a quick breath. Isabel's face remained composed, but her gaze had sharpened. Sosa, the foreman, stood in the doorway with his shoulders set, as if bracing for accusations. Don Emilio's voice was low. Who would do such a thing? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he asked lightly, "Who uses this room?" "It is Mamma's," Camilla said, and the word sounded as though it hurt her. Or it was, when she received people. "And now?" "No one," Isabel replied. "Not in weeks. We take coffee outside." Poirot nodded, then turned to Reyes. "The tray. Who brought it?" "I did, monsieur." "And the decanter, fresh water?" "Yes, monsieur." Poirot's fingertips brushed the outside of the decanter. He did not pick it up. He merely touched and withdrew. "Cold," he murmured. "So it was placed recently." It was a small remark, but I noticed Dr. Alvarez stiffen, as though the detective's attention to domestic details offended him more than any grand theory could have. Poirot rose. "This is not the crime," he said. "It is the announcement. Someone wishes you to know they can enter your peace whenever they like." Doña Mercedes gave a short laugh. "Peace? In a house of women and nerves?" Don Emilio's eyes flashed. "In a house of my name," he said, and there was steel in it. Poirot's voice remained mild. "Now we see Madame Rivas." Dr. Alvarez stepped forward at once, the professional barrier coming down like a gate. "She is unwell. She is not receiving." Poirot looked at him calmly. "Doctor, I did not cross an ocean to discuss a glass. I will see her." Don Emilio's nod was decisive. "Yes, you will." A tight silence followed, the kind in which people discover who is truly in command. Dr. Alvarez did not argue further, but his mouth had the look of a man who is filing the moment away for later. Upstairs, the air changed. The corridor was darker, quieter, as though the house kept its secrets above the level where visitors were permitted to breathe. Reyes stopped before a closed door and knocked once. A woman's voice came through, controlled but strained at the edges. "Who is it?" "It is Reyes, Senora. Don Emilio is here." A pause. "I am not receiving." Don Emilio spoke softly, and for the first time I heard the tenderness beneath his authority. "Lucia, it is important." The bolt slid back. The door opened only a few inches. Madame Rivas looked out at us as one looks out from behind a barricade, pale, elegant, and tightened by sleeplessness. Her hair was arranged with care that suggested stubborn pride rather than vanity. Her eyes moved at once to Poirot, and her expression sharpened. "And who is this?" Poirot bowed slightly, not attempting to push the door. "Madame, I am Hercule Poirot. Your husband believes you are in danger." A flicker, half disbelief, half relief, crossed her face. "Danger," she repeated, as though it were a melodramatic word she disliked. "Dr. Alvarez says I am merely tired." Poirot's tone was gentle. "Are you tired, madame?" Her mouth tightened. "I am exhausted." "Do you sleep? In pieces?" "And when you wake?" Her fingers tightened on the edge of the door, whitening. "I hear him," she said quietly. "At night. Slow steps outside my door. Always outside, never inside. As if someone wishes only to be heard." Camilla made a small sound in her throat. Isabel's gaze dropped, then rose again, steady. Poirot inclined his head. "And the smell you mentioned?" Madame Rivas's eyes shifted as though the memory offended her. "A bitterness," she said. "Like something scorched. It comes and goes. Sometimes it is strong enough to taste." Poirot's gaze flicked, very slightly, to the handle, the keyhole, the edge of the door itself. Then back to her face. "May I come in, madame?" For a moment her pride held her like a hand at the back of the neck. Then she opened the door wider. Her room was both comfortable and defensive. Curtains were drawn, though the night was not yet deep. A lamp burned. Flowers sat in vases. Too many, as if someone had tried to buy cheerfulness in bulk. The bed was made with severe precision. A chair stood beside it like a guard. On a small table near the window was a glass of water. Madame Rivas noticed Poirot's glance and gave a short, impatient gesture. "Yes, yes, water. If you are hoping it is poison, you will be disappointed." Poirot's voice did not change. "I do not hope for poison, madame. I hope only for the truth." He moved slowly around the room, not touching anything, yet observing everything. The window latches, the hearth, the wardrobe, the dressing table arranged with near military neatness. Dr. Alvarez watched him with a kind of professional irritation, as though Poirot were examining a patient without a license. Poirot stopped and turned. "Who has access to this room?" he asked. Madame Rivas gave a tired little laugh. "In a house like this? Everyone and no one. Reyes? Yes. Your husband? Of course. Doña Mercedes?" A muscle moved in her cheek. "Yes." "Your daughter?" A brief, pained flicker. "Camilla sometimes. Isabel also." "And you, Doctor?" Dr. Alvarez answered quickly. "Only when necessary." Poirot looked at him. "And lately it is necessary often." A pause. Just enough to be noticed. "Yes," Dr. Alvarez said. Poirot nodded once, as though that were a fact placed neatly into a drawer. He turned back to Madame Rivas. "Tonight," he said, "a glass was thrown in the sitting-room below." Her eyes widened, and for the first time she looked not merely tired, but vindicated. "Thrown?" "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again her voice was steadier. "You see," she said softly, "it is not only in my head." Don Emilio stepped forward, anger breaking through restraint. "Lucia, who is doing this to you?" She looked at him with something like sorrow. "If I knew," she said, "I would not be frightened." Poirot's voice was calm. "Then we will discover it." He paused, then added almost casually, "Tomorrow morning I would like to visit the stables." Sosa shifted in the doorway. "The stables are my responsibility, monsieur." "Excellent," Poirot replied. "Then you will help me." Sosa's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, a sound came again, so faint at first I thought it was the house settling into its own bones. A soft scrape close by. Not outside the door, inside the room. Some stories are meant not only to be heard, but to be kept. We're very happy to share that Nocturnal Tales, The Collected Mysteries, Volume 2, is now available as an ebook. This second volume brings together 8 of our earliest mysteries, all substantially rewritten, expanded, and carefully edited for the page. These are not simple transcripts of the audiobook episodes. We've gone back through every story, reworked the structure, tightened the prose, improved the clues, and brought them closer to the standard of our more recent work. The result is a proper collected edition, 906 pages, 8 complete mysteries, and an original Art Deco illustration for every story. With every purchase, you receive both EPUB and PDF formats, so you can read on Kindle, Kobo, Apple Books, tablets, or desktop. Volume 2 is available now for $3.99 through Patreon, Gumroad, and Buy Me a Coffee. And this is only the beginning. We have more than 150 stories in the Nocturnal Tales catalog, and our plan is to keep preserving them in collected ebook editions. So, if you'd like to support our work and build your own Nocturnal Tales library, Volume 2 is ready now. Thank you, as always, for listening, reading, and supporting the stories. Chapter 4. The Sound Inside the Room. For a moment, no one moved. It is a curious thing. When men hear a noise in a strange house at night, they either rush at it like heroes in cheap novels, or they stand perfectly still, hoping the noise will explain itself and go away. We did the latter, which, in my opinion, is the more honest response. The scrape came again, light, deliberate, as if some small object had shifted against wood. Camilla's hand flew to her throat. Don Emilio took a single step forward, then stopped, caught between dignity and the impulse to put himself physically between his wife and whatever threatened her. Poirot did not look at any of us. He was watching the room. His eyes traveled, not quickly, but with purpose, over the wardrobe, the dressing table, the bedside chair, the heavy curtains. Then they paused on the small table by the window, where the glass of water stood, Madame Rivas followed his gaze. Her face tightened. "It is not—" she began, and stopped. Another scrape. Poirot moved at last, but without haste. He crossed to the table and bent slightly, inspecting the surface and the objects upon it. The glass, a small dish, a book placed with too much care. He did not touch any of them. He merely looked. Then he dropped his gaze to the floor. A thin cord ran from beneath the table toward the skirting board, almost invisible in the half-light, so fine and pale that it might have been mistaken for a loose thread or a trick of shadow. It disappeared under the edge of the rug. Poirot straightened and turned to Don Emilio. "Tell your people to light the corridor," he said quietly. No shouting, no running. Don Emilio nodded once, and Reyes was already moving, silent as smoke. Poirot looked at me. "Hastings, stand by the door. If anyone attempts to leave, you will stop him. Politely, if possible." I confess my heart gave a jump. Stopping unknown persons is not my favorite hobby, but I placed myself at the doorway with what I hoped was a competent air. Doña Mercedes, who had been frozen in her usual posture of contempt, spoke sharply. "This is absurd. A thread? We are to be frightened by sewing?" Poirot regarded her with mild patience. "Madame, it is often by something very small that one controls something very large." He crouched, and with the delicacy of a man handling lace, lifted the corner of the rug, only a finger's width, no more. Underneath was not dust, as one might expect, but a narrow gap in the floorboard close to the skirting. So narrow it could easily have been overlooked, and precisely in the place where the rug's pattern helped disguise it. Through that gap, the thin cord vanished. Camilla made a sound, half breath, half whisper. "Mama?" Madame Rivas's face had gone very still. I had the impression that this little discovery did not surprise her so much as confirm something she had been forcing herself not to believe. Dr. Alvarez spoke too quickly. "There are old houses everywhere with gaps. Mice—" Poirot cut across him with quiet firmness. "Doctor, mice do not arrange rugs with such care." He rose and walked to the door. Reyes had returned, and behind him the corridor was now bright with lamplight. The house had awakened, not noisily but attentively, like a household of servants listening for a bell. Poirot stepped into the corridor and looked along it. There was a stillness that felt staged. Doors on either side closed. A portrait at the far end, a man on horseback, severe and confident, the ancestor one consults when the living disappoint. Poirot turned to Reyes. "Who sleeps on this side?" Reyes answered at once. "Only the Senora, monsieur. Next room is storage. After that, Doña Mercedes." Doña Mercedes drew herself up. "Are you suggesting—" Poirot raised a hand, not rudely, but as one signals a carriage to stop. "I suggest nothing yet. I observe." He knelt by the skirting board just outside Madame Rivas's door. There, almost hidden in the join between wall and floor, was the other end of the cord, drawn taut, leading toward the storage room. Poirot followed it with his eyes. "Reyes," he said, "the key." Reyes produced it immediately, as though he had been expecting precisely this moment. He unlocked the storage room. The door opened onto darkness and the faint smell of linen and old wood. Reyes lit a lamp and held it up. The room contained trunks, folded blankets, spare chairs, and a rack of riding boots. Nothing that looked sinister. Nothing that looked like a villain. Poirot stepped inside, still following the cord. It ran beneath a trunk and disappeared behind it. "Move nothing," Poirot said. He crouched, reached behind the trunk, and drew out the cord slowly, hand over hand, until something came with it. A small wooden device. Nothing more than a simple lever fixed to a board, the cord tied to it with neat knots. A child's contraption, one might have thought, except for the care with which it had been placed and concealed. Poirot tested it with the lightest pressure of a finger. The lever moved, and somewhere behind us, faint but distinct, came the same scraping sound. The device had been made to pull something against something else, producing noise without the maker being present. Camilla stared at it as though it were a snake. "So, someone does this," she whispered, "and Mama thinks it is footsteps." Madame Rivas's voice came from the corridor, quiet and furious, and I was told it was nerves. Dr. Alvarez stepped forward, his face rigid. "This proves nothing about danger, only that someone is being foolish." Poirot turned his head slightly. His eyes were kind, but there was iron beneath the kindness. "Doctor," he said, "you keep repeating that word, foolish, as if it is harmless. But foolishness that is systematic is not foolishness. It is strategy." Doña Mercedes spoke, her voice clipped. "Who would do such a thing? A servant?" Reyes did not react, but I saw the smallest tightening at the corners of his mouth. Poirot lifted the cord lightly, letting it slide through his fingers. "This is not servant work," he said, "not because servants cannot be clever. They can, but because this is done by someone who knows the house well enough to choose the right board, the right rug, the right room, and who assumes they will not be questioned." He looked at Don Emilio. "Someone with permission." Don Emilio's face had hardened into something I did not like to see, a man discovering that his private world is not safe. "Then we will question everyone," he said. Poirot shook his head. "No, not yet." Camilla stared at him, bewildered. "Not yet, but—" Poirot's voice was gentle, almost soothing, which somehow made it more chilling. "Because the person who does this wishes reaction. They wish panic. They wish you to accuse the wrong person, to quarrel, to expose your weaknesses. If we question everyone tonight, we give them exactly what they desire." Madame Rivas stood in the doorway now, her posture still proud, but her hands clenched at her sides. "And what do you propose, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot replaced the device on the floor with care, as though it were a piece of evidence in a courtroom. "I propose," he said, "that we say nothing. We remove this quietly. We behave tomorrow as if nothing has happened." Doña Mercedes gave a short laugh. "You want us to pretend. We are excellent at that." Poirot looked at her. "Yes, madame, you are." Then he turned to Reyes. "Take this," he said, handing him the device. "Lock it away, and the cord, remove it, but do not leave marks, as if it never existed." Reyes nodded and took it without a word. Poirot's eyes moved then, briefly, to Dr. Alvarez, not accusing. Not yet. Simply noting. "Tomorrow," Poirot said to Don Emilio, "you will show me the stables. Also, I would like to see the accounts of the estancia. Who is paid, who is owed, who has been dismissed recently, who has been promoted." Don Emilio blinked. "The accounts? What have they to do with footsteps?" Poirot's expression was almost amused. "Everything," he said. "Because people do not invent ghosts unless they gain something from the haunting." He turned to Madame Rivas. "Madame, tonight you will sleep with your door locked, and you will place no water by your bed unless Reyes brings it, and you watch him pour it." Dr. Alvarez stiffened. "This is unnecessary." Poirot did not raise his voice. "It is necessary," he said simply. Madame Rivas studied him for a long moment. Then very slightly she nodded. "And if I hear him again?" Poirot's eyes were steady. "Then we will know he is still playing," he said, "and we will let him believe the game is working." We left her then, Reyes closing the door with quiet precision, as though sealing an envelope. Downstairs, the house had returned to its polite calm. Lamps glowed. The courtyard fountain continued its soft insistence. The night outside was wide and peaceful, as if the world beyond La Ventana had never heard of fear. Yet as we crossed the corridor toward our rooms, Poirot stopped suddenly. He bent, and with 2 fingers lifted something from the tiled floor. It was a single dark hair. Not long, not grey, and, most distinctly, not the hair of any man I had yet seen in that house. Chapter 5. Morning at La Ventana. Poirot held the hair up between finger and thumb as though it were a rare thread from an expensive cloth. In the lamplight it looked almost black, but not quite. It had a glossy depth to it, too smooth for the rough hair of the estancia men, too dark for mine, and certainly not grey. Poirot did not announce conclusions. He did not even announce that it mattered. He simply looked at it, then at the corridor, then at the closed doors. He slipped it into his handkerchief, with the care of a jeweller pocketing a stone. "Hastings," he said softly. "You see? Even the house leaves its signatures." "And whose signature is that?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "You ask for the end at the beginning. It is your charming English impatience." He continued on toward our rooms as though nothing had happened. I confess I did not sleep well. It is difficult to rest in a house that has just demonstrated politely and efficiently that it contains hidden chords. At breakfast the next morning, La Ventana performed normality with admirable discipline. The table was laid as it had been the night before. Fruit, bread, strong coffee, a dish of eggs, and the steady presence of Reyes moving like a thought made visible. Camilla was pale but composed. Isabel spoke of the weather and the condition of a mare due to foal in the next month. Doña Mercedes criticized the bread, as if it were a moral failing. Don Emilio spoke little, his attention divided between his plate and the doors, as though expecting the house to produce another demonstration. Dr. Alvarez arrived late. He looked immaculate, and his tone had the bright firmness of a man determined to correct a misunderstanding. "I am pleased to see everyone well," he said, smiling at Camilla and Isabel as though he were distributing health by charm alone. "We were all overtired last night." Doña Mercedes seized on the word like a weapon. "Exactly. Overtired. Too much imagination." Madame Rivas did not appear. Poirot ate neatly without haste, and spoke very little. Yet I noticed something. He watched not only faces but habits. Who drank first? Who waited? Who reached for sugar without looking? Who kept their hands in their lap? When breakfast was nearly finished, Don Emilio set down his cup. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "the stables." Poirot nodded as though this were an appointment in Whitehall. "Bien." We went out into the morning. In daylight, La Ventana looked almost too peaceful to be believed. The veranda cast clean shadows on the courtyard tiles. The fountain sparkled. Beyond the house, the estancia stretched into a disciplined green distance. Fences, paddocks, and the long, low line of the stables. The air smelled of grass, leather, and horses, and for a moment I felt that the night's tension had been a bad dream. Then we reached the stable yard, and the dream remembered itself. The stable block was solid and well kept, built around a yard of hard-packed earth. Tack hung in neat rows. Buckets stood in orderly places. Everything suggested competence, and also control. Sosa met us there with a face that was polite but guarded. "Senor," he said to Don Emilio, and then, less warmly, to Poirot, "Monsieur." Poirot greeted him with that mild courtesy which, in Poirot, always feels like a glove over steel. "I thank you for your assistance, Monsieur Sosa." Sosa's jaw tightened at the French title, but he let us in. Inside, the stable smelled richly of animals and clean straw. Horses shifted in their stalls, ears flicking, eyes watching. One chestnut gelding extended his nose toward me in search of encouragement, and I obliged him with a pat. Poirot, I observed, did not touch the animals. He watched them as he watched people, respectfully, but with attention to what they might reveal without words. "This is the horse you mentioned," Don Emilio said, stopping before a tall bay with a fine head and the restless energy of a creature bred to win. Relampago. The horse stamped once, not in fear but irritation. Poirot studied the stall. The latch, the hinges, the straw, the water bucket. He crouched, lifted a little straw between his fingers, and let it fall again. "On the morning he was found sweating," Poirot asked, "who discovered him?" "One of the boys," Sosa said. Poirot glanced at him. "Which boy?" Sosa hesitated only a fraction. "Pablo." "And Pablo reported to you?" "Yes." Poirot nodded as if noting something ordinary, then turned to the latch. "Was this stall locked?" Sosa gave a short shrug. "It is always latched." "That is not the same as locked," Poirot said gently. Sosa's eyes narrowed. "No key, monsieur. Only the latch." Poirot's gaze travelled to the yard beyond, to the gate, to the fence line. "And the gate to the paddock?" "Locked at night," Sosa said quickly. "Who holds the key?" Sosa's answer came too fast. "I do." Poirot's expression did not change, but I saw the slight pause in him, the little grey moment when a statement is placed on a shelf marked possibly useful later. He moved on without pressing. We walked the length of the stable. Poirot asked simple questions about feed, routines, who rose first, who closed last, which men slept where. To anyone listening carelessly, it would have sounded like idle curiosity. But Poirot was not a careless listener. At the far end near a tack room, he stopped abruptly. On a peg hung a riding bridle, leather polished, buckles bright. At first glance, it looked perfectly serviceable. Then I saw what Poirot had seen. One strap had been repaired recently. Not neatly, not with the pride of a saddler, with haste. Poirot did not touch it. He merely looked at the repair, then at Sosa. "This is the bridle that was cut?" Sosa's shoulders stiffened. "One of them," he said. "We fix what we can." "Who fixed it?" Sosa hesitated again. "A man." Poirot waited. The silence in a stable can be very persuasive. Sosa's mouth hardened. "I fixed it." "And you told no one?" Sosa's eyes flicked to Don Emilio, and then away. "It is my work," he said. "Why trouble the house with it?" Don Emilio's voice was sharp. "Because it was cut." Sosa's gaze met his at last, and there was something in it that was not insolence, but a kind of stubborn pride. "Because the house troubles itself enough," Sosa said. "Because you have women who listen to shadows and doctors who call everything nerves, and an aunt who calls everything shame. And when something breaks, it is always the men who must mend it quietly." Doña Mercedes was not there to hear this, but I could almost feel her indignation waiting in the house like a loaded pistol. Poirot, oddly, looked pleased. "Thank you," he said. Sosa blinked, thrown off balance. "For what?" "For telling the truth," Poirot replied. Then he turned and walked out into the yard as though the stable had finished speaking. Outside, the sun had risen higher. 2 stable boys passed at a distance leading a horse. One of them glanced toward us and then looked away too quickly. Poirot watched him with mild interest, as though watching a bird that had flown at the wrong moment. Don Emilio fell into step beside him. "Now you have seen it," he said. "The stables are secure. The men are loyal. It makes no sense." Poirot's gaze remained on the yard, on the gate, on the fence line. "It makes sense," he said. It makes perfect sense, if the purpose is not to steal the horse. Don Emilio frowned. Then what is the purpose? Poirot did not answer directly. Tell me, he said instead, when did your wife first begin to fear? Don Emilio's face darkened. About a month ago. And before that? A pause. Don Emilio's voice lowered. Before that we had trouble in the family. What trouble? Don Emilio hesitated, and I saw the old habit of discretion clamp down. Poirot did not press. He merely nodded, as if accepting that this door too would open in its own time. We will speak later, he said. Now, show me where the household keys are kept. Don Emilio looked surprised. In the office? Why? Poirot's moustache gave a faint, satisfied tremor. Because in a house where people hear footsteps and see signs, the most powerful thing is often not a ghost, he said. It is a key. We returned toward the house. As we crossed the courtyard, Isabel came out onto the veranda and called to her uncle. Papa wants you in the office, she said, then corrected herself quickly. I mean, Reyes says there is a matter of deliveries to sign. Her slip was small, but it landed in my mind with a dull thud. Papa, not uncle, not Don Emilio. Papa. Don Emilio did not seem to notice. He nodded and went inside. Poirot, however, had paused. Isabel met his eyes. For the briefest moment her composure wavered, not into guilt exactly, but into something like calculation. Poirot smiled at her, softly, almost kindly. Mademoiselle, he said, you love this house. Isabel's chin lifted. Of course. And you would do much to protect it. Her voice was smooth. Anyone would. Poirot nodded as though agreeing and walked on. I followed, and as I did I glanced back toward the stable-yard. One of the boys, perhaps Pablo, was standing still, watching us from the shade of the doorway. When he saw me looking, he turned quickly and disappeared inside. At the same instant, somewhere upstairs in the house, a window shutter closed with a crisp, deliberate click, too firm to be the wind, too timed to be accident. Poirot did not look up, but his hand went very lightly to his breast pocket, where he kept his handkerchief, and where the dark hair lay folded like a secret. Chapter 6. The Window That Opened. Poirot did not go early to bed. 0. He merely allowed the house to believe he had. That is the advantage of a man who is small, quiet, and universally underestimated. People forget that a detective is most dangerous when he is not performing. Shortly before midnight, he sent me into the corridor with an instruction that sounded almost lazy. Hastings, he said, you will stand where you can be seen, like a very respectable statue. If someone wishes to sneak, it is good they find you. It saves time. I took my post outside the stair landing, where the corridor divided. One branch toward Madame Rivas's rooms, the other toward the office and the back staircase. A lamp burned low. The house smelled of wax and night flowers and that faint, stubborn bitterness that no amount of politeness had managed to scrub away. At 12:30, a door eased open. It was not Isabel. It was Camilla. She came out in a travelling cloak, hair pinned tight, boots in her hand. She moved with the careful speed of someone who has practiced leaving silently. When she saw me, she froze, eyes wide, breath caught. For a moment, she looked very young. "Captain Hastings," she whispered. "Please, don't." "Camilla," I said, startled into using her name. "What on earth—" Behind me, Poirot's voice arrived as if it had been waiting. "Bonsoir, mademoiselle." Camilla turned as though she had been struck. Poirot stood at the edge of the lamplight, calm, perfectly dressed, his moustache immaculate. In his hand, folded neatly, was a lady's handkerchief with a single dark hair pinned inside it like a specimen. Camilla's chin lifted in a reflex of pride. "I am leaving," she said. Poirot nodded as if she had announced she intended to take tea. "Yes," he said gently. "But you will not leave until you explain why you made your mother believe she was losing her mind." Her eyes flashed. "I did not—" Poirot raised a hand. Not accusing, measuring. "The glass that was thrown," he said softly. "The cord device hidden in the storage room. The footsteps. The shutters closed at the right moments. The smell that comes and goes." He glanced at the cloak. "And now the small suitcase you have hidden behind the linen press." Camilla's breath shuddered. For a second she looked as though she might cry. Then, to my astonishment, she laughed. Quietly, bitterly. "You think I wanted to harm her?" she said. "I wanted to save her." At that moment, a soft sound came from behind us. The back staircase, a foot on a step, then stillness. Poirot did not turn his head. "Ah," he said, almost pleasantly, "and there is the reason." The figure who stepped into the lamplight was Pablo, the stable boy. Not in his working clothes, but in a borrowed jacket too large at the shoulders. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on Camilla with something like devotion and terror combined. I confess it was not the villain I had been expecting. Don Emilio appeared then, drawn by the disturbance. Fully dressed, eyes sharp with the sort of fear that has learned to disguise itself as anger. Isabel followed him, dark hair loose, her expression composed in the way of a woman who wishes to appear surprised without taking the trouble to feel it. Doña Mercedes arrived last, as always, as though she had been waiting to be called to a scene. "What is this?" Don Emilio demanded. Poirot answered him with a calm that made Don Emilio's fury look suddenly childish. "It is your daughter's escape," Poirot said, "and the explanation for your month of ghosts." Camilla's voice broke through, rapid now, as if the words had been trapped too long. "He was going to be sent away," she said, pointing at Pablo. "Sosa found out. He found the letters. He said Pablo was insolent. He said it was shameful. He said he would have him dismissed and reported." Sosa, nowhere visible, might as well have been in the room. His presence lived in the rules of the house. Don Emilio's face tightened. "Camilla," she lifted her chin. "You were going to let it happen," she said, "because you do not see him as a man. You see him as part of the stable." Don Emilio's mouth opened and closed again. It was not a man accustomed to being accused by his own child. Poirot took over quietly. "Mademoiselle did not plan to ruin the house," he said. "Only to distract it. If everyone believed Madame Rivas was unwell and the household was threatened by a mysterious presence, then all eyes would be upstairs and inward, on doors, shutters, whispers, while she arranged to leave by the back staircase with young Pablo." Camilla's hands clenched. "I needed time," she said. "Time for the mail coach. Time to get money. Time to get out without you stopping me." "And your mother?" Don Emilio said, his voice low. "Your mother's terror was a convenience?" Camilla's face changed then. Real shame, not theatre. "I didn't mean it to go so far," she whispered. "At first it was only little things. A door, a sound. Then she began to believe it. And then everyone began to treat her as if she were fragile, as if she were already half gone." She swallowed hard. "And when people begin to call a woman nervous, they will forgive anything done to her." That line landed with a weight I did not like. Doña Mercedes gave a small, contemptuous sound. "Romantic nonsense," she said. "A girl's hysteria." Poirot looked at her mildly. "Madame," he said, It is not hysteria to wish not to be used like furniture. He turned to Isabel. And you, mademoiselle, how curious that you alone knew the correct corridor and the correct phrase. Isabel's eyes did not move. What phrase? Poirot smiled faintly. In the courtyard you said Papa wants you in the office, and then you corrected yourself. You wished to plant a second story, one about parentage, about hidden scandal, so that if I looked too closely I would look in the wrong direction. Isabel's composure held, but a muscle twitched in her cheek. Camilla stared at her. What are you talking about? Poirot's voice remained gentle. Camilla did the theatre, he said. Isabel prepared the alibi. If the household fell apart, she intended the blame to drift somewhere else. Don Emilio's gaze snapped to Isabel. Isabel? Isabel's voice was smooth. Uncle, this is absurd. Poirot held up the hair, still pinned in his folded handkerchief. This hair is yours, he said calmly. Not because you are guilty of the haunting, but because you have been in places you pretend you were not. The office, the key cabinet, the corridor at night. Isabel's eyes narrowed. You cannot prove... Poirot interrupted softly. I do not need to prove everything tonight. I need only to prevent the next disaster. He turned back to Don Emilio. The trouble in the family you would not name, he said, is not what you think. There is scandal here, yes, but not the kind you were watching for. Poirot glanced at Camilla and Pablo. The scandal is simple. Your daughter fell in love with a boy you would throw away, so she manufactured ghosts to buy herself an exit. He let that sit for a breath. And the twist, monsieur, is that it worked, until it began to work too well. Don Emilio looked past all of us, toward the upper floor where his wife lay sleepless behind locked doors. When he spoke, his voice had changed. My wife, he said quietly. She believed she was... Poirot nodded once. Yes, he said, and now you see why I asked for the keys. In any house, monsieur, the key is power, but the more dangerous thing is the word you allow people to use. Nerves. It opens every door without touching a lock. Camilla's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. I never meant to hurt her, she whispered. Poirot's expression softened. I believe you, he said, which is why you will go now, not into the night, not into legend, but into the morning with honesty. He looked at Don Emilio. Your daughter must speak to Madame Rivas, Poirot said, not to confess theatrically, but to restore her reality. Then you will decide what is to be done with Pablo, by law, by family, by conscience, but you will decide it in daylight. Doña Mercedes drew herself up. This is shame, she said. This is ruin. Poirot regarded her. No, he said. It is merely truth. Shame is what you are doing in the dark. And then, very quietly, the door at the far end of the corridor opened. Madame Rivas stood there, wrapped in a dressing gown, her face pale but steady. She had heard enough. She looked at Camilla, only at Camilla. Come, she said simply. Camilla went to her, trembling, and for the first time in the entire month, the house stopped acting. It became, briefly, just a house. A mother, a daughter, and the harsh work of repairing trust. Poirot touched my sleeve. Voilà, he murmured. No murder, but a lesson. A lesson, I whispered back. Poirot's moustache twitched, not with vanity but with sadness. That fear is easy, he said, and once you teach it to a person, you cannot easily take it back. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of Poirot and the Footsteps Behind the Door. This was never a story about a ghost in the traditional sense. It was about what happens when fear is turned into a tool, when a woman's nerves become a convenient label, when footsteps can be produced on command, and when a respectable family would rather talk about a haunted house than admit what their rules are doing to the people who live under them. Poirot can't cure the distance between parents and children, or the class lines that treat a stable boy as disposable, but he can strip away the legend and leave everyone face to face with what they actually chose to do. Along the way, we saw how a few small, controlled incidents, broken glass, a trembling door, a hidden cord, were enough to make an entire household rearrange itself around a lie. If the story left you thinking about how easily nervousness, imagination, and propriety can be used to shut someone up, or how quickly people are ready to believe that a building has a will of its own, that unease was very much intended. If you'd like more mysteries in this vein, cases where Poirot isn't fighting the supernatural but the social machinery that makes superstition so useful, let us know in the comments and tell us where you'd like him to be dropped next. If you want to help keep these full-length cases coming, you'll find links in the description for Patreon and for one-off support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. Your backing is what allows us to spend the time on long, fully produced episodes like this. Without that financial support, we will eventually be forced to slow down or stop altogether. For now, thank you again for staying with us to the last line. Until the next case, be wary of any house that explains everything for you. Pay attention to who holds the keys and who controls the stories. And remember, walls don't invent ghosts, people do.